Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is our first virtual conference presentation, and it's everyone's first virtual GovCon, I guess. So we're all going to go on this ride together. Thanks for spending your time here with us today, even though there's no free lunch or coffee. Today, we're talking about what we've learned from a couple of research projects that we've done across federal, state, and city open data programs, and about what they're working on and what they're struggling with. So we're going to start off with some intros. We'll tell you a bit about how we went about this work. We'll tell you what we found, and then we'll share where we see the opportunities for really moving government open data forward are. And we'll be wrapping up with some next steps around how we might start working together to meet those challenges. A bit about who we are. Civic Actions is a design and engineering firm with over 15 years of government experience. We're fully distributed, and we have team members, over 100 team members in every US time zone and some abroad. The open data team is a cross-functional team of researchers, designers, engineers, and product and project managers within Civic Actions that works to develop products and support services for government agencies, organizations working to present their data and make it open to their communities. We've worked with data.gov, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, the USDA, Health and Human Services, as well as a few cities and states on their open data programs. We're also the maintainers of DCAN, which is an open source open data catalog built in Drupal. And we're working consistently to improve the DCAN product that we offer to our clients and to the open data community. We recently relaunched DCAN 2 in Drupal 8, and we're actively working with stakeholders in the open data community to continue to create a product that serves their needs. In all of our work, we use human-centered design principles to make sure that we're really building things that truly provide value to users. And what we're sharing today is a result of that kind of work. So today you're going to be hearing from 3 team members. Jacqueline, who's our UX lead, myself, I'm the DCAN product manager, and Susanna, who's our open data account manager. And I'll pass it over to Susanna now.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, so what is open data? So according to the Open Knowledge Foundation, open data is data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirement to attribute and share alike. So what does that mean to our daily lives? It means we can see data as a common good. We can be informed of where a community's budget is being allocated, advocate for changes. We can compare school performances and make informed decisions for our families. We can access COVID data that helps us assess the risk of where we are. Beyond public usage, open data allows for more knowledge sharing across sectors. For example, our research institutions may have more opportunities for scientific collaboration, or a state legislator can learn about where healthcare workers may need additional funding. And within government, open data allows for knowledge sharing among other agencies' data. So a fire department may look at rainfall data to determine where there might be a fire risk, or a local commissioner may use their county public transit data to determine where to prioritize resources. All these examples reflect the framework that we at Civic Actions operate under for what open data ideally does. Ideally, open data drives evidence-based policy and decision-making, supports transparency and accountability, and is a language through which our institutions speak to each other and to the public. So this is why it was so important for us to talk to those who are working in open data. So let's learn a little bit more about you. Where do you think you fall? Do you consider yourself a data publisher or a data consumer? Are you both? Are you considering starting a data program? Do you work at the federal, city, or state level, or international level? What agency, city, or what agency are you at? Are you at a city or state agency? Or are you a vendor providing data solutions? So we're gonna try something different. Let's go ahead and add your answers to the chat, and I'll just give us a minute to see where we're all coming from. If you can, just add to the, yeah. Okay, wonderful. Great, so I'm seeing some data consumers, platform developers, and a publisher at the national level. Well, wonderful, great. And with that, I will pass it on. So I see that some of you are people that we also spoke to, and I'm also seeing people on the federal level. So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Jacqueline, who's gonna talk a little bit more about how we went about talking to all of you.
Awesome. So here we'll go over our process for learning about open data with different local and federal agencies. So we saw that there were some people represented here from federal. There were some people who are also data consumers, and we saw that the intersection of those are oftentimes, they do meet. Our hypothesis was that while most agencies have open data programs, there are ways to improve it for both the internal team working on data management and external users like data consumers who might be searching for, downloading, and using the data. So we had three main goals in mind for these conversations. The first was to gain a better understanding of each agency's overall open data program goals. We wanted to understand what their programs look like. For example, who are the key players and stakeholders to their program? Who sets the strategy, and how is the team structured to carry out that strategy? And finally, for those consumers, who are they trying to reach and how do they reach them? That leads to the second goal of gaining a better understanding of what is and isn't working in the data management process, particularly for those who directly handle gathering and distribution of data, such as data managers and data owners. Understanding pain points and successes helps us determine areas for improvement, as well as recommendations based off of patterns we may see. Finally, we wanted to get insight into existing tools or processes that help with data management. Gaining insight into what teams are doing helps us in mapping out the ecosystem of tools and processes that already exist so that we don't reinvent the wheel in our efforts for finding better ways of data management. With these goals in mind, we conducted 55-minute response-guided interviews with about 18 agencies, both local and federal. We reached out to participants from the DCAN community, as well as federal agencies who opted into talking to us about their open data program goals. We were able to speak with a range of people representing different team structures under different levels of open data program maturity. We started with a core set of questions to understand who we were talking to, their responsibilities on the team, and how to try to understand what their program, data programs and management processes look like at a detailed level. The result was a wide and rich range of responses that we synthesized for insights. So the graphic that you see on the right shows part of a journey mapping exercise we did to help pattern out basic details to the data management process across agencies. We also pulled details from each interview and organized and grouped them to identify larger themes, key insights, and opportunities, which we're going to cover in the rest of this talk. And as a side note, while the participants we interviewed are known to us, we made sure to anonymize their information to report back to the larger community. This allows participants to speak freely about their work while also letting us highlight patterns without diverting the conversation or attributing anything to a particular agency, because these are things that we saw across the board.
Okay, so what we learned that the following were open data program goals. To share data between departments within the city or state, to aggregate data across their government, to make data accessible and useful to the public, to drive a data-driven culture in their government, and be a point of contact for the public through data. So we found a lot of consistency across goals, and you can see that these are very lofty goals. So I want to stop and go ahead and ask all of you to post in the chat the letter which corresponds to the program that you're working on. Which one do you feel really represents the goals? It could be one or multiple ones. If none of these apply, you can go ahead and say none of these. And if all of these apply, you can say all of these. Awesome. Okay. Great. And this is if you're working on a program. If you are not working on a program, you can say which one you would like your goals to be.
I'm also seeing a lot of C, which is making data accessible and useful for the public. And we'll go over that a little bit, but that's really heartening to see too, because like we know that just putting out data isn't going to ultimately serve the public. Making it accessible and making it actually usable for the public is obviously a heightened goal for a lot of people. So it's good to see that represented. So it looks like we're moving on to what's working. So right off the bat, we learned that there were a few basic things that worked across local and federal agencies in defining and aiding in their open data program goals. So first and foremost, almost every agency we spoke to mentioned the federal level mandates, such as the Evidence Act being core to what they do. These mandates pave way for data programs across city, state, and federal entities and lead to necessary creations of roles such as chief data officers and data stewards to help shepherd it through. We also found that people were solving their own problems on their own time with a mix of homebrewed, open source, and proprietary solutions in light of one ultimate tool for data management. While we had wondered what a tool like this would look like, talking to different agencies really highlighted how some places already had their own workflow and processes, which means that anything we might suggest as an opportunity would need to be flexible and perhaps look beyond a single tool-oriented solution. Finally, the people we talk to are scrappy. They care about the work that they do, they're curious, and they're enthusiastic about beyond what even these mandates mandate, like we just saw with wanting to make data accessible to people. However, we also learned that pure enthusiasm doesn't solve everything. And that moves us up onto the struggles. There were some obvious patterns of things that weren't working that surfaced in the course of speaking with different agencies. While things like the Evidence Act helps turn agencies onto open data, we found that there was a lot also that was lacking programmatically. The first of these was the skills gap. This comes by way of high turnover of roles, which means a loss of institutional knowledge. We heard from several agencies of people leaving without a knowledge transfer plan, which leaves whoever is replacing them having to hunt down information or redefine processes, which does waste a lot of time. We also saw fuzzy job descriptions, especially for new roles such as data stewards. Some participants we talked to either had these duties hoisted upon them on top of existing ones, or were training people who have no background or little background in data. Codifying job descriptions and the responsibilities and finding the right fit seems to be a common theme that showed up amongst the people that we talked to. There's also a skills gap where people who need the data don't know how to analyze it. So like I had mentioned before, data on its own isn't inherently accessible, and we need to curate processes and tools to make sure that data is usable for everyone. However, oftentimes agencies are lacking the skills to augment what they put out with data analysis. And finally, there's difficulty in building buy-in with less tech-savvy stakeholders. There's a skill gap between people running data programs and the people they need to support those programs. So for example, you might have someone at the top of an organization saying, okay, we're moving forward with this data program. And you've got some parts of the entity that are more data savvy and can get going with that right away, while other parts of the agency are left behind or were never properly onboarded to begin with, which creates disconnect and confusion. So oftentimes these knowledge gaps are predicated on resources and budget. And we often find that budgets are created well in advance, which means that they don't leave room for any needs that haven't already been planned for. In particular, budgets are not set aside for specific roles, like previously mentioned data stewards, which could explain why that role at some agencies are often vaguely defined or put upon existing people secondary to what they're already doing. Open data does seem to be lower on the priority list compared to other things, meaning that resources are limited or never enough. These resources may be people, but they're also tools and support. For instance, we talked to teams that are made up of only 1 or 2 people on the data program, or teams who have had to make trade-offs on specific tools or come up with band-aid solutions. While federal mandates may have lofty goals, it doesn't make a program, unfortunately, and resources and budget helps agencies better meet those goals. Another thing that would help agencies is strategy and coordination. So people are tasked with creating a data-driven culture in their agency, but that requires buy-in and collaboration, not just from the top, but from the entire team. This requires a lot of strategy and coordination, but oftentimes it doesn't get met due to the previously mentioned budget and resource restraints. Consequently, one of the most asked about features and one of the most talked about homebrewed solutions that agencies showed off to us centers around notification and collaboration. We know that the process from collecting data to dissemination is long and arduous and passes through many hands along the way. So it's no wonder that methods of collaboration was top of mind to a lot of people that we talked to. Coordination of workflows and data handoffs come up under the theme of federated and centralized models as well. Several agencies talked about data management within their sub-agency being smooth up until it gets handed off for dissemination. So once that happens, they describe a black hole effect, meaning that they no longer have insight into what's happening with their data, if rich metadata is able to make it through all the way, and if there are any blockers that prevent it from getting posted to the public in the first place. This means that no one sees the whole picture except for the data program manager who shoulders everything and is often spread too thin. The theme that ties this all together rests on defining workflow and governance, and figuring that out means that everyone is on the same page, properly supported, and able to coordinate and collaborate.
Okay, so if open data is a language for communicating with the public, right now it's a one-sided conversation. We heard from many people that portals push things out, but they're not engaging audiences in a dialogue that should bring the government closer to the people. So one of the main things we also heard about were visualizations. Everyone knows they want visualizations. They know that people love visualizations, but they weren't really sure what it's useful for people to see. We found that a lot of agencies don't know who their audiences are. For a lot of portals, the audience is everyone, but it's hard to serve everyone. And there was also difficulty understanding what consumers were doing with the data or using it for. There was difficulty having capacity to respond to inquiries about data, many because of the reasons that Jacqueline mentioned before, budgets and resources. And there was also difficulty connecting the public to the people that own the data or the experts that maintain the data with the right questions. So starting and maintaining a dialogue was very difficult because being able to get answers to the public takes time and capacity. Okay. For data usability, data is for being used, but often the programs focus on the sharing a lot more than the using, which makes sense because the platforms are run by the sharers. So we heard from people that we spoke to that the data that they published, they weren't really sure if it was high quality, they weren't sure if it was up to date. The mandates were usually for quantity over quality. And some of the data sets were outdated, but it was sort of a situation where people weren't sure if they were supposed to update the data or if the original sources of the data were supposed to update it. So that also seemed to be a struggle. In terms of data findability, everyone told us that the reason that they were putting out the data was for people to get it. But there's a lot of reasons why people can't find it or get the data. In some cases, people don't even know that these data portals exist. And people get to those portals but don't know how to find the data that they need. So we heard for the future that there's a lot of interest in making sure that people can navigate and find what's valuable to them. And then also we heard part of the struggle was people not knowing how to best utilize the metadata or how to best, not knowing what people needed to find. So now that we went through all of the struggles, which of these really resonated with you? Which ones do you feel that you're struggling with the most? And if there's something that wasn't covered, go ahead and add it to the chat. Or if you want to tell us which one was the one that you really felt that you related to, go ahead and add that to the chat now. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad that this really resonated.
And just to recap, the biggest struggle patterns that we found were skills gap, resources and budget, strategy and coordination, communication with the audience, and data usability and data findability.
Was there anything missing from there that you all feel that you experienced on a day-to-day? Data usability and data findability. Great, thank you, Leah. Yeah, we heard that from a couple of people that we interviewed.
And I imagine it's also probably coming up for a lot of the data consumers in the audience. Okay. Well, feel free to keep adding there to the chat while we keep talking. I'd love to hear it. So we know that these look like a large, intimidating list of struggles, but the great news is that we're all struggling with similar things. And that means that we can also share solutions and that we have the opportunity to create those solutions together. So I hope this has really highlighted how much you're not alone. In fact, we think we're at a really exciting moment where we're at a point where so many agencies are doing this and working on the same problems. So let's take a look at the opportunities for us to bring open data to the next level. So the first question is, what do we do with this information? As a human-centered design team, we follow a design thinking process to help us identify and solve problems. So if you've never seen this before, it starts with empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, then implementing and testing, and it's a cycle. So it goes back and starts again at empathizing as we test. So we started with empathizing. That was talking to data managers across these agencies and cities and states and really trying to understand the challenges that they're facing and their aspirations for their open data programs. Then we moved to the definition stage. This is where we synthesized the information and looked for themes challenging the sector and what we want to address next, which is what you just saw. So that brings us up to the present moment, which is our next stage, which is ideating. So to help us ideate, we use how might we statements that really help us frame the opportunity and give us prompts to ideate. So we're going to pass those on to you. So our first opportunity here is how might we engage data consumers more in our work? From the data that we share to how we share it, to supporting getting it found and used, how can we really bring together the two sides of the data conversation? We're also asking, how might we ensure data quality? We've gotten really good at making sure data gets published, and we saw a lot of really awesome ways that the data publishing problem is getting solved. But now we're asking ourselves, how do we make sure that it stays useful? Next, how might we build strong data organizations where interagency communication flows well? We see data sharing roles getting siloed at the federal level and at the city and state level, difficulty getting buy-in throughout agencies. So how can we create a more interconnected data management flow? We're also asking, how might we share resources and knowledge? We've seen open data programs doing all kinds of work and solving all kinds of problems. How can we get that knowledge shared between us? How can we avoid duplication of efforts and move forward together, building on each other's work? And finally, how might we engage in more strategic planning for the future? How do we really create a plan about becoming data-driven organizations? And how do we envision the future and outline the steps toward it? So we've been sharing a lot of the what and a lot of the why, and I think you're seeing that we don't have a lot of the how for you, but we do have a few modest recommendations if your agency or city or state is working on an open data program right now. Our first recommendation is to try focusing on the data usage. So most of the people that we talked to were actually really great at getting the data out there, but most of the people we talked to had less of a focus on making sure the data gets used. So what we want to say is that focusing on data usage can start really small. You can find one use case, find one group of stakeholders, find out what they need, and make sure that they can get it. So maybe it's just keeping one data set up to date as you can for them, or it's producing one visualization that can answer a very specific question that they have, or it's working with them to create a really specific search tool that's going to help them really get into your data. Some of the most high impact programs that we saw were ones with very small or very specific data sharing and very specific, very small, but high impact data usage. So when you do this well end to end, even in just a really small way, you're going to strengthen everything from your data quality to your communication and feedback mechanisms to your data publishing processes. You can even look for somebody inside your agency who can make use of the data that you're sharing. You can find a nonprofit, you can find a specific kind of researcher. But just try to get your end-to-end from where the data comes in all the way to the data usage straightened out in even just the smallest way that you can. Our second recommendation is around sharing the big picture whenever you can. A lot of the folks that we talked to at the federal level who are publishing data, they really felt like just one cog in this giant machine that they couldn't fully see, which is less than inspiring and also really hampers folks who are trying to solve their own problems because they can't see the whole board. So rather than just training your data stewards on their tiny part of the process and how to use your specific tools, just always start with the grand vision. Why are you sharing any of this data in the first place? What are you trying to achieve? And wherever you can, give everyone involved the full picture of how the data, where it's coming from and how it's getting used, or even how it could be used if you don't know yet. And as much as possible, create materials that share the full picture of how the data moves through your agency, as well as into and out of it, and show people where they, as a human, fit into the big picture. At the city and state level, this also builds accountability between stakeholders whose data has been aggregated. If we know where the data is coming from, then we can go back and talk to that person. If we know where the data is going, we can go back and talk to that person, and they know to talk to us, as long as we can see the full picture. This builds morale and buy-in. It helps people better understand their work and solve their own problems, and it builds better connections throughout the data management process. And our third big one is building community. Nearly everyone we talked to felt somewhat lonely in their positions. They're working on small teams with few resources, and everyone's really trying to do a lot. We also saw that everyone that we talked to had developed all kinds of really great ways to solve lots of different problems. And we could see what a benefit those solutions could be to other agencies and local governments. But we also saw deep silos between them. And we heard a lot of people say that they just wanted to be talking to other people and finding out what they were doing and how they were solving problems. Which brings us to our next step. In the spirit of our last recommendation, we'd really like to take advantage of having this group all here together to say, let's start helping each other out right now. If you're working on an open data program and you're looking for some company, or you're just getting started and want to ask for some advice, or
Did we lose Kim?
Okay, well, it seems like we lost Kim, so we can just, okay, so if you're just so we're posting a form in the Slack channel. Oh, Kim, you're back.
Sorry about that. But I think Susanna was just about to tell you.
Well, so we're posting a channel right now. We're posting a form in the Slack channel right now for you to share your information. We'll share the information from the form with everyone who adds their information so you can start communicating with each other. If there's interest, we'd also really like to invite you all to help us ID around solving these problems together, and we're happy to facilitate that going forward as well.
Yeah, so that brings us to the end of our presentation, and it looks like we've still got at least 15 minutes to hang out here together.
Also, just to build off of what Susanna said about helping us ideate, we heard a lot of desire from people within different agencies to look at and to be able to communicate and collaborate across different agencies, so that they're not reinventing the wheels themselves. And if someone's already doing something well, then that knowledge can be shared. So that's the reason why we have these entry points to the Slack channel, as well as that form that I posted. But in the ideation that we can run these kind of workshops, we would be focusing on those how might we questions, which if we move back to slide 29, we can try to answer those. And this is part of what we do in design and in trying to generate ideas to test hypotheses further on. So how might we engage data as consumers more in our work? How might we ensure data quality? How might we build strong data organization? where interagency communication flows well? How might we share resources and knowledge? How might we engage in more strategic planning for the future? And so what that looks like is bringing people together from different backgrounds and different agencies to maybe focus on one question and answer these. And this is really blue sky. We facilitate it right now digitally with digital sticky notes, and have people organize into buckets, and then kind of go from there. But the initial idea for that is to get those conversations moving and started, and to start generating ideas so that we can then take those and run with it, run with the hypothesis, and try to start testing things out in an agile way. And that is the design process that we kind of just went over.
Yeah. So I think we have this room for another 15 minutes. So we're happy to take questions or to just start, a discussion here with everybody who's here. If people want to unmute or ask questions in the chat, we're happy to talk about stuff. We're happy we're all here together.
Some folks might be uncomfortable doing that on the video. So if you would like me to, I can stop the recording and you can have a discussion. Would that work?
Yeah.
And then I think I just saw a raised hand.
Yeah, Jen's raised their hand.
First then.
Hi, sorry, probably I wasn't expecting to be on video. Hello. Yeah, it was just, I mean, we've been a DCAN user for a while and find it very good, but it was just a reflection on a lot of what was being said in the State of the Union. I've literally just come off a different Zoom meeting with about 500 scientists from across the globe in a kind of UN intergovernmental capacity, discussing about best practices and sharing of data. And there's so much in common, so much in parallel that's being recognized across the board. They're talking about the same things about silos, engaging their user communities and stuff like that. So yeah, just a comment to say, it's not even just within the government context, but obviously a lot of those are kind of public bodies in one way or another as well. But it's a very widespread issue, I think, around the whole data release and publishing.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think you're pointing to this like important part of the data equation, which is we talked to, the data gets generated somewhere. Someone's measuring water levels somewhere or measuring potholes. And then you've got the folks who are actually getting that data out to the public. And then you've got the folks who are using the data. And we talk to those people in the middle. And a bunch of the people on the consumer end are here on the call as well. And yeah, you just got off a call with the people on this end of the people who are actually collecting the data. And yeah, putting us all back together.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk around, these mandates do a good job of saying you should be putting data out there, you should be making it public. But then what does it look like on the program level to not only get the data out there, but to make it actually usable to consumers? And it looks like from the conversations that people put in chat that is something that we all kind of agree on, is data usability as well as findability.
I'd be curious to hear from some of our data consumers what your experience was like using open data. If anyone wants to share that. I don't know if anyone's trying to talk, but you're muted. Or if no one's trying to share. The chat works also if you want to just...
Yeah, if you want to just write to us, that works as well.
Was anything here surprised? Oh, sorry.
I'm going to press stop on the recording so that folks who may be nervous about being on screen can ask a question. Okay. Thank you so much, and recording is being stopped.
Thank you.